If you have seen a birth on TV, or if you've had a birth in a hospital with an epidural, you have heard this. Push, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. I don't need to actually count to 10 and insult your intelligence, but what I'm saying is that you have been coached in how to push. You've been told to bear down and push as hard as you can. You've been told to curl up around your baby. If you were my patient in a hospital, you heard that same stuff from me too, sadly. But why? Why is that needed? Today, we're going to talk about when the contractions have opened your cervix up and baby is on his or her way out. Birth time is getting so close. What's next? What is this whole pushing phase about? And how do we need to handle it the best? Let's dive into it.
Are you a Christian woman yearning for a beautiful, joyful pregnancy and birth with a focus on God, not medical tests? Are you worried the birth you want isn't possible and you're tired of being treated like an accident waiting to happen? Hey mama, I'm Lori, host of Your Birth God's Way. I'm a certified nurse-midwife now, but I wasn't always. After working for nearly 20 years in the broken maternity system, I too was in your shoes wondering how I could have the birth I wanted and that I felt God meant for me to have. I found a secret that has actually been known since the beginning of time. God's way is the best way. Spoiler alert, God made us and our babies, and He knows us best. He designed us perfectly for pregnancy, birth, and nourishing our babies after birth, if we work with His design and not against it. In this podcast, you'll learn how to be healthy and have joy during this time of life that will be over before you know it. So if you're ready to reclaim your birth and your babies for His glory, go turn on a few episodes of Bluey for that little one on your hip so you can put the focus back on you for a few minutes with me.
So it's review time, but this is another week that I have no new reviews, and I still haven't gone back to see where I started to start with. So I have no review to read for you. But what does that tell you? It tells you that if you're the one who hasn't left me a review yet, and you go leave one this week, there's a good chance it's getting read next week. So go do it. If you haven't already, go over to Apple Podcasts or your friend's phone that has Apple Podcasts, because sadly, that's the ones I see. I don't even know if the other apps let you leave reviews. Some of them do, maybe, but I don't know that they actually leave you a place to type in, but Apple does. And that is one of the best ways that you can not only encourage me, but you can help me find other moms like you who could benefit from the content that I share here. So go do that real quick if you haven't already. It makes a huge difference, and I appreciate it so much. Okay, so today we're talking about the time that you have waited for 9 or 10 long months all through pregnancy, and you're finally to that time that you have been waiting for. Some see this as a really good time because you can finally do something. Like all through labor, you kind of just feel like you're sitting there waiting, right? It's uncomfortable. You're having to wonder how long this is going to last and all these things, but you're finally to the point that you can do something. It feels good to do something. This is the most intense part of labor. This is the point where you're going to bring your baby out and you're going to get to meet him or her finally. But the way it's done in most births, the way it's done in hospitals across America and around the world, is it really the best? Is it needed? The way that it's handled there, is it needed? I think you probably already know the answer, but let's think it through and talk it out so that you can think critically through how we're doing this, how it all works, and you can decide for yourself what the best way is to handle this. First of all, you need to understand that the reason why it happens the way it happens so often in the hospital is because most moms there have epidurals. A large portion of them are either being induced or augmented. That means they're being given medications to make labor happen faster, or maybe like make labor happen at all if it hadn't started on its own. And then that makes labor hurt worse. So then they have the epidural to help them cope with labor. When you get that epidural, you give up power because you can't feel fully. Even if you feel some pressure, you're not going to feel normal pressure. So when pushing time comes, it's going to be a little bit harder and it's going to be more work. Some hospitals will turn the epidural down at this point to try to get you to the point that you can feel enough to help out, but not everywhere. And sometimes it doesn't work that fast. When you're in the hospital, you're checked every 2 hours. And pushing is often started arbitrarily. So they check you, you're 10 centimeters, you're excited. Yay, you're finally complete. baby may or may not be in a good position to start pushing though. And it's going to happen anyway. Now, some places will let you do what's called labor down. That means that you can wait for the baby to come down to get to maybe +2, +3 station, but not everywhere. Sometimes you just start pushing. And that's where this coach pushing comes in, because when you're numb, you often do need direction. But believe it or not, you actually don't have to push. You can wait and let your body do the work. It's that term I just said a second ago. It's called laboring down. It's letting your uterus continue to push the baby closer to being born without you having to actively push. And if you have an epidural, sometimes this is going to be, in fact, I would say most times, this is going to be your best option, because you aren't going to be able to push as effectively because you can't really feel that well about where you're pushing and how you're pushing. The problem, though, is most hospitals don't want to wait. They want you to get started, and they want you to prove whether or not you're going to be able to bring the baby down. You've heard this term, failure to progress. That's part of it. Failure to descend. That's part of it. Both of those terms imply that the baby is not coming down like he should. And when it's in the pushing phase, it basically means you're not able to push well enough. Now, some places will give you options. So like I said, they might turn off the epidural, give you a little bit more time. Other places will just say, this baby's not coming out this way, just not going to fit. Never do they take into account that you're laying flat on your back in a bed, oftentimes with your legs up in stirrups, which is literally the worst position you can possibly give birth in. It makes your pelvic opening the smallest it will ever be. It makes your baby have to go uphill and fight gravity, which we all know how effectively any of us can fight gravity, right? They never consider that. They never consider that maybe we should get you upright. Maybe we should let you move around some. No, we're just going to push in this position that is only for the good of the doctor or the midwife. It is not for your good. None of this is what is best for you or for your baby. So let's talk about some different aspects of pushing that kind of play into this whole scenario, whether or not you have an epidural. First, did you know that your body has what's called a fetal ejection reflex? Fetal ejection reflex. You might hear it called a Ferguson reflex in some places. When your baby gets to a certain point in your pelvis, your body is going to want to push it out. You're going to have a reflex that's just as natural as having a reflex hammer hit your knee and your knee kicks. It's the same concept. It is a reflex, and your body is going to push the baby out with or without your help. It's not the same force as if you're pushing with it, but you will end up bearing down, whether you realize it or not, because once it gets to that point, it just kind of happens. You don't need coaching. Think about it this way. You don't need to be told or taught how to poop, right? Yeah, you heard me. I said it. You don't have to think about how to poop. You didn't have to think about how to poop when you were a baby. It just happens. Now, as you get older, you feel the urge. And when that urge happens, you go to the appropriate venue. But there comes a point where there is nothing that you can do to prevent it from happening. Once it gets down far enough, it's going to come out. God made your body to do this. And giving birth is the same way in many aspects. So I want you to remember that. I've heard it told, and I don't know that I've ever actually seen any studies to prove it or heard about any cases to prove it. Obviously, there wouldn't be a study on this, but maybe a case. But I've been told that a baby can be born from an unconscious woman. It can happen because the body can do everything that it's made to do without your help. And when I say unconscious, maybe somebody who's in a coma, maybe somebody that something awful has happened to and they're in the hospital and they're unconscious. Their baby eventually can be born because all of these natural instincts are going to happen whether or not you do anything about it. It all goes back to God's design. He put all of these things in you to make them happen as they should without your help. I want you to keep that in mind. Now, obviously, that's not a situation that happens hardly ever, if ever, but it just reinforces the point that this thought that you must be yelled at and told to push just might not be needed. Let's talk about another aspect of pushing. It's called the ring of fire. We've probably all heard it, and I'm not talking about a Johnny Cash song. The ring of fire. This is the phrase that describes the sensation you feel when the baby is crowning or rumping if it's coming out breech. That feeling is intense. It is probably the most intense point of labor. The skin is being stretched to its maximum. At this point, the fetal ejection reflex is well underway. The instinct when you feel this in this pushing phase is to either run from it, meaning try to fight it, make it not happen, or to push hard and push through it to make it end. And neither one of those is likely the best option. Okay? You don't want to run from it because it's going to have to happen anyway, and it will last longer if you run from it. But we'll talk in a second about probably what the best way is to handle that, not only to help control the delivery, but to minimize your risk of tearing. See, if you're doing what's called purple pushing, which is that coach pushing, where they're yelling at you and telling you to get 3 sets of pushing in with every contraction and to hold your breath for 10 seconds and then take a deep breath and then hold your breath for 10 seconds again and take a deep breath and hold your breath for 10 seconds again. And during those 10 seconds, you are pushing as hard as you possibly can, whether or not you can feel what you're doing. Yeah, if you've been my patient back in my medical days, I was the one hollering at you. I'm sorry to any of you who might be listening, because that particular way of pushing causes a vagal response, which is not something you necessarily want during labor, but it also causes an unnaturally strong force on your pelvic floor, especially if you're on your back with your leg in stirrups. And if that's how we push during that ring of fire time, it might make that head deliver too fast before that skin has had time to stretch well, and it could cause tearing to be worse. The best way is controlled crowning, if you can do it. And I say if because, again, we're working with a reflex here. There's only so much you can do to really control it. But there is something you can do. And oftentimes moms are able to blow through it. That would be one way to describe it. It's kind of hard to describe, but basically instead of that bearing down pushing, it is blowing and kind of just gently pushing down and gently pushing down as you're blowing out, gently pushing down. And really that's the best way to push in general, is to let your air come out as you're pushing, to have your mouth open, to have your jaw relaxed. Oftentimes that's not your natural instinct because you want to tense up. We've talked last week about why we don't want to tense up. But these gradual, gentle pushes, excuse me, that sounded funny. These gradual, gentle pushes that will bring your baby's head or rump out slowly and controlled in such a way that your skin has time to stretch, and you have the best chance of not tearing. Those are some little different things to think about that all play into the pushing. But let's talk about the reality. When you give birth naturally, the way God designed it, you really don't have to worry about any of this. Instinct is going to take over when you're giving birth naturally. You're going to know what to do. And if you don't, your midwife will direct you. She'll help you understand. She'll help you to direct your efforts in a way that preserve your energy and use it in the best way possible. You will know when to push and you'll know when to stop, because you don't need a book or anything else to tell you how. It's just as natural as pooping or anything else. And I wanted to end what I wanted to tell you about pushing on that note, because really there's not a lot to talk about. It's going to happen. You don't need anybody hollering at you or telling you to hold your breath or telling you that you got to get 3 rounds of pushes in on every contraction or you're not going to do well enough to make this happen. I can remember that. I can remember telling moms that they're wasting their energy or that they really need to do better so that they can get 3 pushes every contraction. It doesn't even make sense. And yet I did it, and most labor nurses today are still doing it. when you give birth naturally, when you don't give up your power by submitting to an epidural, you will be in control. You will know when it's time to push, even if you don't know that you know. Your subconscious mind will know, and it'll just happen. I'm trying to remember. I don't think with any of my babies I ever even got checked when I was complete. I just started pushing because I just knew. Nobody had to tell me I had a number 10 to write on a chart for I'm 10 centimeters now. I can push now. Yay. No, because when that reflex happens, you are. The baby's down there. It's time. And I want to reassure you of that you've got this, mama. God made you to do this, just like he made you to do everything else we talk about on here. You are a woman, and God made you to have babies. Now, if you love learning about labor and feeling prepared to give birth God's way, then I would love to invite you to come join the Your Birth God's Way online Christian childbirth education course, because there we learn about this and everything else that you need to know in so much detail so that you can make really good, confident decisions, knowing you're doing what's best for you and what's best for your baby. I want you to come check it out. You can either go down to the description of the podcast app you're using, or you can just go to the website, go.yourbirthgodsway.com. Scroll down a little bit. There's some buttons there in the middle. Click on the one for the course and go get signed up, or just read more about the course. If you have questions, you're welcome to email me. I'm always here to help you out. And I just want you to feel confident. I want you to know that God made you for this. And that's what that course is all about, is just reinforcing everything that God put into you, helping you to understand what God put into you so that you are fully prepared and ready to go. Can't wait to talk to you guys again next week. Have a great day.
Real quick, if today's episode blessed you in any way, would you head over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a quick 5-star written review? It'll take you less than a minute, but it's the best thank you you can give me. And it will help my show to reach more mamas just like you, so we can all find God's best for our families. I'll see you right back here in a few days.